What's up, everybody? Core Use Bloody History. Continuing with ZR Rifle. On May 11th, 1961, Dearborn prepared a two-page draft document which set forth ways in which the U.S. could overtly aid and encourage the opposition to Trujillo. The draft noted that means of stepping up the covert program were considered in separate papers. Dearborn draft document of May 11th, 61. This Dearborn draft of May 11th, 61 was apparently used as a basis for portions of the Dominican Republic contingency paper discussed below. Two documents entitled Program of Covert Action for the Dominican Republic were provided to the committee staff for State Department files. Each appears to be a draft of the covert activities paper described in Dearborn's May 11, 1961 memorandum. One draft recommended an expanded U.S. offer to deliver small explosives, devices, and arms. Document indicating it was attached to Dominican Republic contingency dated 5/12/61, bearing numbers 306 to 308. The other draft is very similar, except that it concludes that delivery of arms within the Dominican Republic to members of the underground is not recommended. Document from State Department files bearing number 310. Attached to the second draft was a one-page document which Frank Devine believes he wrote. It listed 8 numbered points, including the following. 1. The U.S. government should not lend itself to direct political assassination. 2. U.S. moral posture can ill afford further tarnishing in the eyes of the world. At some point in time, it seems that number 2 here stopped being a fucking consideration, wouldn't you say? U.S. moral posture can ill afford further tarnishing in the eyes of the world. 3. We'd be encouraging the action, supplying the weapons, effecting the delivery, and then turning over only the final execution to unskilled local triggermen. 4. So far, we have seen no real evidence or action capability. Should we entrust ourselves and our reputation to this extent in the absence thereof? 7. Can we afford a precedent which may convince the world that our diplomatic pouches are used to deliver assassination weapon? Document from State Department files bearing number 313. The other points raised in document 313 related to the likelihood that any such involvement by the U.S. would ultimately be revealed. On May 15, 1961, Acting Assistant Secretary Corps sent to Undersecretary Bowles a document entitled Covert Action Programs Authorized with Respect to the Dominican Republic. That document outlined the existing special group approvals for covert assistance to Dominican dissidents, and, while making no recommendations as to further policy, suggested that the special group review the outstanding approvals and communicate to interested agencies the status of such authorizations. State Department document from Corps to Bowles 5/15/61. During this period, a document dated May 13th, 61 was prepared at the request of Richard Goodwin and was thereafter circulated within the State Department. This document, entitled Program of Covert Action for the Dominican Republic, reported, quote, CIA has had in the direct custody of its station in Ciudad Trujillo a very limited supply of weapons and grenades. In response to the urgent requests from the internal opposition leaders for personal defense weapons attended to their projected efforts to neutralize Trujillo, 3 .38 caliber revolvers and 3 carbines with accompanying ammunition have been passed by secure means to the opposition. The recipients have repeatedly requested additional armed support. This memorandum is the first direct evidence of disclosure to anyone on the White House staff of the fact that the arms had been passed to the dissidents in the Dominican Republic. The original ribbon copy of the memorandum has the above quoted material circled in pencil and the word neutralize is underscored. Goodwin testified before the committee that he circled the above paragraph when first reading the memorandum because the information concerning passage of the arms was new to him and struck him as insignificant. All right, so let me comment real quick. So the last show, basically we talked about how there was a lot of documentation and paperwork going back and forth asking for permission to pass these rifles, to get these dissidents some arms. And the logical deduction was that if we give these guys the arms, they're going to use them and they're going to kill Trujillo. And so the final decision made, if I'm not mistaken, was that they were not going to pass the arms because they didn't have control over the circumstances under which Trujillo would be killed. Okay. But then you obviously have this memorandum. Program of Covert Action for the Dominican Republic. is what that document is called. And this document reports that, yes, the weapons were given over to the dissidents. This was obviously made at the CIA level. It sounds like in violation of what the State Department wanted. You see, at one point in time, the State Department controlled the CIA. I'm not sure that that is the same relationship anymore. It might be vice versa. This memorandum is the first direct evidence of disclosure to anyone on the White House staff of the fact that arms had been passed to the dissidents in the Dominican Republic. The original ribbon copy of the memorandum has the above quoted material circled in pencil and the word neutralize is underscored. Goodwin testified before the committee that he circled the above paragraph when first reading the memorandum because the information concerning passage of the new arms was new to him and struck him as significant. Under the heading Possible Covert Actions Which Require Additional Authorization, the memorandum to Goodwin indicated that the CIA had a supply of 4 .45 caliber machine guns and a small number of grenades currently in the direct custody of the station in Ciudad Trujillo, and that a secure means of passing these weapons to the internal opposition, quote, for their use in personal defense attendant to their projected efforts to remove Trujillo could be developed by the station. The memorandum made no recommendation to approve or disapprove passage of these weapons. On May 15, 61, Bundy forwarded to Goodwin another memorandum, this one entitled The Current Situation in and Contingency Plans for the Dominican Republic had been received by Bundy from the State Department. Attached was an underlying document which began, quote, recent reports indicate that the internal Dominican dissidents are becoming increasingly determined to oust Trujillo by any means, and their plans in this regard are well advanced. The May 15th memorandum stressed that it was highly desirable for the U.S. to be identified with and to support the elements seeking to overthrow Trujillo. The attachment recommended that Consul General Dearborn inform the dissidents that if they succeed, quote, at their own initiative and on their own responsibility in informing an acceptable provisional government, they can be assured that any reasonable request for assistance from the U.S. will be promptly and favorably answered. Documents from the State Department files bearing numbers 296 to 279 to 286. F. Drafts leading to and final cable of May 29, 1961. A copy of Dearborn's cable of May 16, 1961, requesting urgent State Department guidance was forwarded to Richard Goodwin. At the specific request of Goodwin, the State Department replied to Dearborn on May 17th and advised him to keep in mind the President's view as expressed at the May 5th National Security Council meeting that the United States should not initiate the overthrow of Trujillo before knowing what government would succeed him. Department to Dearborn 5/17/61. Dearborn responded on May 21st, 61, pointing out that for over a year, State Department representatives in the Dominican Republic had been nurturing the effort to overthrow Trujillo and had assisted the dissidents in numerous ways, all of which were known to the department. It was, Dearborn stated, too late to consider whether the United States will initiate overthrow of Trujillo. Dearborn invited further guidance from State. In response to Dearborn's request for guidance, the State Department drafted a reply on May 24th. The draft discussed the conflict between two objectives. One, to be so associated with removal of Trujillo regime as to derive credit among Dominican Republic dissidents and liberal elements throughout Latin America. And two, to disassociate U.S. from any obvious intervention in Dominican Republic and even more so from any political assassination which might occur. Okay, when they say disassociate, they mean plausible deniability. It was said to be the department's considered opinion that the former objective cannot easily override the latter. State Department to Dearborn Cable 5/24/61, not sent. This State Department draft was forwarded to Undersecretary Bowles with the comment that Goodwin considered it too negative and that he would try his hand on a draft, quote, for Bundy to present tomorrow morning. Memo from Achilles to Bowles 5/24/61. A May 26/61 memorandum from Bowles to Bundy begins, quote, following up on our discussion of the Dominican Republic at yesterday's meeting of the special group, I am forwarding you a draft telegram which we would like to send to Henry Dearborn, our Consul General in Ciudad Trujillo, supplementing the guidance he will be receiving on the recently approved contingency plans. Guys, let's pull everything on Henry Dearborn. I know it's going to be a lot, but he was the obviously the ambassador to Trujillo in the Dominican Republic, and so there's going to be some juicy statements in there from him, I'm sure. Minutes of the special group meeting on May 25th, 61 do not reflect any discussion of the Dominican Republic. If, as Bowles' memorandum suggests a discussion concerning the Dominican Republic did occur at the May 25th meeting. It is not known what the discussion involved or what decisions, if any, were made. Richard Goodwin personally prepared alternate drafts to the proposed State Department cable to Dearborn. Goodwin testified that it was his intent in revising the cable to communicate to Dearborn President Kennedy's personal belief that the United States, quote, didn't want to do anything that would involve us further, the United States further, in any effort to assassinate Trujillo. It's from Goodwin 710, page 32. At the same time, Goodwin's draft raised the issue of further covert action and transfer of arms to the dissidents and advised Dearborn to hold out the arms as being available to the dissidents pending their ability to receive them. It was twofold intent of the cable, as revised by Goodwin, to express the desire to remain in the good graces of the dissidents, who it was believed would constitute the new government following Trujillo's assassination, and two, to avoid any action which might further involve the United States in the anticipated assassination. This dual purpose is clearly evident in the cable, which advised, quote, we must not run risk of U.S. association with political assassination, since U.S. as a matter of general policy cannot condone assassination. This last principle is overriding and must prevail in doubtful situation. Quote, continue to inform dissident elements of U.S. support for their position, end quote. According to Goodwin, the underscored material was inserted in the cable at the specific direction of President Kennedy. Something I need to point out here, all this backhandedness, all these deals with the dissidents to supply arms, and ultimately the assassination of Trujillo, this will all happen on Kennedy's watch. This happens under President Kennedy. It's just a fucking reminder. He was no savior. None of them are saviors. None of them will ever save us from anything, especially incoming President fucking Trump. We need Trump for one fucking reason only, to replace Supreme Court justices as they retire. That's it. That's all he's going to do for us. Kennedy is a fucking harsh reminder that not only did Kennedy steal his own fucking election using the mob in Chicago via his father, who was a fucking bootlegger, but all these assassinations happened right under his fucking nose. No strong president would have the CIA operating under their nose like this. Heads would roll. Let me continue. With respect to the 4 machine guns which were in the consulate and which had been repeatedly requested by the dissidents, the cable advised Dearborn that the U.S. was unable to transfer these arms to the dissidents. Dearborn was instructed to, quote, tell them that this is because of our suspicion that method of transfer may be unsafe. In actual fact, we feel that the transfer of arms would serve very little purpose and expose the United States to great danger of association with assassination attempt. The cable, as revised by Goodwin and approved by President Kennedy, was sent to Dearborn on May 29, 61. State Department to Dearborn Cable, 5/29/61. 7, May 30th, 61, and immediately thereafter. A. Trujillo assassinated. Late in the evening of May 30th, 61, Trujillo was ambushed and assassinated near San Cristobal, Dominican Republic. The assassination closely paralleled the plan disclosed by the Action Group to American representatives in the Dominican Republic and passed on to officials in Washington at both the CIA and the State Department. Dearborn Cable to State, 5/30/61. The assassination was conducted by members of the Action Group to whom the American carbines had been passed, and such sketchy information as is available indicates that one or more of the carbines were in the possession of the assassination group when Trujillo was killed. IG report, page 60-61. This evidence indicates, however, that the actual assassination was accomplished by handguns and shotguns. B. Cables to Washington. After receiving the May 29th cable from Washington, both Consul General Dearborn and Station Chief Redacted sent replies. According to Dearborn's testimony, he did not regard the May 29th cable as a change in U.S. policy concerning support for assassinations. He interpreted the May 29th cable as saying, quote, we don't care if the Dominicans assassinate Trujillo. That is all right, but we don't want anything to pin this on us because we aren't doing it. It is the Dominicans who are doing it. Dearborn testified that this accorded with what he had said had always been his personal belief, that the U.S. should not be involved in an assassination, that if an assassination occurred, it would be strictly a Dominican affair. Dearborn 729, page 100, 101. In contrast, the CIA station chief, redacted, did regard the cable as manifesting a change in U.S. policy, particularly on the question of supplying arms. He believed the May 29th cable was the final word in U.S. policy on this matter, and consequently felt the government had retreated from its prior position of offering material support to the dissidents and had adopted a new position of withholding such support. Redacted responsive cable to headquarters stated, quote, "Headquarters aware extent which U.S. government already associated with assassination if we are to at least cover up tracks CIA personnel directly involved in assassination preparation must be withdrawn." Station to headquarters, cable 530-61. Immediately following the assassination, all CIA personnel in the Dominican Republic were removed from the country, and within a few days, Consul General Dearborn was back in Washington. The State Department cabled the CIA station in the Dominican Republic to destroy all records concerning contacts with dissidents and any related matters except not to destroy the contingency plans or the May 29, 1961 cable to Dearborn. C. Immediate post-assassination period. The U.S. consulate in the Dominican Republic was quick to dispatch its early reports that Trujillo had been assassinated, and the U.S. Communications Network transmitted the report to President Kennedy in Paris. The president's press secretary, Pierre Salinger, made the first public announcement of the assassination, preceding by several hours release of the news in the Dominican Republic. Secretary of State Rusk testified that when he learned of Salinger's announcement, he was most concerned. Rusk said that Trujillo's son Ramfis was also in Paris, and he was afraid that Ramfis, upon first learning of his father's death from the press secretary to the president of the U.S., might try to retaliate against President Kennedy. All right. Now we are moving on to something called the Schneider Report. Reviewed and agreed to by drafting subcommittee, August 27th, 1975. All right, we have a lengthy table of contents here. 1. Summary. 2. The President's initial general instructions and background. 3. CIA's implementation of Track 2. Talks about a constitutional coup approach, military solutions, Chile task force, false flag base, chief of station. Oh, this will be good. Hopefully all the stuff is actually here. Summary. On September 4th, 1970, Dr. Salvador Allende Gossens, Gossens, won a plurality in Chile's presidential election. Since no candidate had received a majority of the popular vote, the Chilean constitution required that a joint session of its Congress decided between the first and second place finishers. This constitutional requirement had in the past been pro forma. The Congress had always selected the candidate who received highest popular vote. The date set for congressional joint session was October 24th, 1970. On September 15th, 1970, President Richard Nixon informed CIA Director Richard Helms that an Allende regime in Chile would not be acceptable to the United States. The CIA was instructed by President Nixon to play a direct role in organizing a military coup d'etat in Chile to prevent Allende's ascension to the presidency. The agency was to take this action without coordination with the Departments of State or Defense and without informing the U.S. ambassador in Chile. While coup possibilities in general and other means of seeking to prevent Allende's ascension to power were explored by the 40 Committee throughout this period, the 40 Committee was never informed of this direct CIA role, nor did it ever approve that role. Only the institution to which the agency was to report, both for informational and approval purposes, was the White House. All right, we have a asterisk here. Dr. Allende, a longtime senator and founder of the Socialist Party in Chile, was a candidate of Popular Unity Coalition. The coalition was made up of communists, socialists, social democrats, radicals, and dissidents, Christian Democrats. Allende was a self-proclaimed Marxist and was making his fourth try for presidency. His opponents were Radomir Tomic Romero, candidate of the ruling Christian Democracy Party, and Jorge Alessandri Rodriguez, candidate of the right-wing National Party. Dr. Allende won 36.3% of the popular vote. Alessandri was second with 35.3% of the vote. Dr. Allende's margin of victory was 39,000 votes out of a total of 3 million votes cast in the election. The incumbent president, Eduardo Frei Montalvo, a Christian Democrat, was ineligible for re-election. Chilean law prohibits presidents from succeeding themselves. Interesting. In practice, this meant that the CIA was to keep the president's assistant for national security affairs, Henry Kissinger, informed of the activities. Between October 5th and October 20th, 1970, the CIA made 21 contacts with key military and carabinero police officials in Chile. Those Chileans who were inclined to stage a coup were given assurances of strong support at the highest levels of the U.S. government, both before and after a coup. One of the major obstacles faced by all military conspirators in Chile was a strong opposition to a coup by the commander-in-chief of the army, General René Schneider, who insisted the constitutional process be followed. As a result of his strong constitutional stand, the removal of General Schneider became a necessary ingredient in the coup plans of all Chilean conspirators. Unable to have General Schneider retired or reassigned, the conspirators decided to kidnap him. An unsuccessful abduction attempt was made October 19, 1970, by a group of Chilean military officers whom the CIA was actively supporting. Damn. A second kidnap attempt was made the following day, again unsuccessfully. In the early morning hours of October 22, 1970, machine guns and ammunition were passed by the CIA to the group that had failed on October 19th. That same day, General Schneider was mortally wounded in an attempted kidnap on his way to work. The attempted kidnap and the shooting was apparently conducted by conspirators other than those to whom the CIA had provided weapons earlier in the day. A Chilean military court found that high-ranking military officers, both active and retired, conspired to bring about a military coup and to kidnap General Schneider. Several of the officers whom the CIA had contacted and encouraged in their coup conspiracy were convicted of conspiring to kidnap General Schneider. Those convicted of carrying out the actual kidnap attempt and killing of General Schneider were associates of retired General Roberto Vial, who had initially been thought by the CIA to be the best hope. However, later the CIA discouraged General Vial because the agency felt other officers, such as General Camilo Valenzuela, were not sufficiently involved. General Vial was convicted by the military court and received a 20-year prison sentence for being the intellectual author of the Schneider kidnap attempt. General Valenzuela was sentenced by the military court to 3 years in exile for taking part in the conspiracy to prevent Allende's assumption of office. The military court found that the two generals had been in contact through the coup plotting. The principal facts leading up to the death of General Schneider, all of which were discussed in more detail below, are as follows. 1. By the end of September 1970, it appeared that the only feasible way for the CIA to implement the presidential order to prevent Allende from coming to power was to foment a coup d'etat. 2. All the known coup plots developed within the Chilean military entailed the removal of General Schneider by one means or another. United States officials, 3, continued to encourage and support Chilean plans for a coup after it became known that the first step would be to kidnap General Schneider. 4. 2 unsuccessful kidnap attempts were made, one on October 19th, the other October 20th. Following these attempts, and with knowledge of their failure, the CIA passed 3 submachine guns and ammunition to Chilean officers who still planned to kidnap General Schneider. 5. In a third kidnap attempt on October 22nd, apparently conducted by Chileans other than those whom weapons had been supplied, General Schneider was shot and subsequently died. The guns used in the abortive kidnapping of General Schneider were, in all probability, not those supplied by the CIA to the conspirators. The Chilean military court, which investigated the Schneider killing, determined that Schneider had been murdered by handguns, although one machine gun was at the scene of the killing. 6. While there is no question that the CIA received a direct instruction from the president on September 15th to attempt to foment a coup, the committee revealed sharply conflicting testimony about whether the White House was kept informed of and authorized the coup efforts in Chile after October 15th. On one side of the conflict is the testimony of Henry Kissinger and General Alexander Haig. On the other, that of CIA officials. Kissinger testified that the White House stood down CIA efforts to promote a military coup d'etat in Chile on October 15, 1970. After that date, Kissinger testified, and Haig agreed that the White House neither knew of nor specifically approved CIA coup activities in Chile. CIA officials, on the other hand, have testified that their activities in Chile after October 15th were known to and thus authorized by the White House. We have an asterisk here. The committee has not been able to determine whether or not the machine gun at the scene of the Schneider killing was one of 3 supplied by CIA, right? This is how they got, this is their like last resort plausible deniability. It's like, okay, we knew the guy, and yeah, we trained him. Okay, yeah, and we funded him. Yeah, we bought him that mansion and that car and that Hummer and a private army. And yeah, we gave him a bunch of weapons. And yeah, he actually killed the guy, but we don't know that he killed him with our weapons. God, to think that we had something to do with this is ridiculous. Please. None of this shit would hold up in front of an actual like jury of their peers, right? Like if you had to go into trial over something and you presented this as part of your defense, the fucking jury would be like, what? You gotta be fucking kidding me. This conflict in testimony, which the committee has been unable to resolve through its hearing or the documentary record, leaves unanswered the most serious question of whether the CIA was acting pursuant to higher authority, the CIA's view, or was pursuing coup activities in Chile without sufficient communication, the Kissinger-Haig view. Well, what do you think? Of course, it's the fucking CIA's doing this without authorization. That's their nature. Here's a long asterisk. The basic issue is whether or not the CIA informed the White House of its activities. In context, informing was tantamount to being authorized. No one who testified believed that the CIA was required to seek step-by-step authorization for its activities. Rather, the burden was on the White House to object if a line of activity being pursued by the CIA seemed unwise. Both Kissinger and Haig agreed that if the CIA had proposed a persuasive plan to them, it almost certainly would have been approved. The CIA did not believe it needed specific White House authorization to transfer weapons to Chileans. In fact, CIA Deputy Director of Plans Thomas Karamesinas testified that he did not formally approve the transfer, but rather that in context of the project, it was clear that the agency had the authority to transfer weapons, and that it was clear to Karamesinas' subordinates that he would approve their decision to do so. He believed he probably was informed before the weapons actually were sent. Okay, this is deja vu all over again. Because now we're talking about Chile, right? But this is the exact same bullshit that went on with the transfer of weapons to the fucking Dominicans. Everyone's like, I don't know what you're talking about, right? This is Mexico City in the Oswald case. This is the CIA's fucking... This has to be done in training. They teach you to fucking pass the buck to somebody else, to shirk responsibility. And that's exactly what the fuck is happening. That's what the CIA fucking does. They all need to go to fucking prison as traitors, and some of them executed, unquestionably. All right, 2, the president's initial general instruction and background. A, September 15th, White House meeting. On September 15th, 1970, President Nixon met with his Assistant for National Security's Affairs, Henry Kissinger, CIA Director Richard Helms, and Attorney General John Mitchell at the White House. The topic was Chile. Handwritten notes taken by Director Helms at that meeting reflect both its tenor and the president's instructions. This is a quote, 1 in 10 chance perhaps, but save Chile. Worth spending. Not concerned, risks involved. No involvement of embassy. 10 million available, more if necessary. Full-time job, best men we have. Game plan, make the economy scream. 48 hours for plan of action. In his testimony before the Select Committee, Director Helms recalled coming away from the meeting on September 15th with the following, quote, the impression that the president came down very hard, that he wanted something done and he didn't care how much, that he was prepared to make money available. That was pretty all-inclusive order. If I ever carried a marshal's baton in my knapsack out of the Oval Office, it was that day. Helms' testimony, July 15th, page 610 and 11. Asterisk. Director Helms also testified that September 15th meeting with President Nixon may have been triggered by the presence of Augustin Edwards, the publisher of the Santiago Daily El Mercurio, in Washington. That morning, at the request of Donald Kendall, president of Pepsi-Cola, Henry Kissinger and John Mitchell had met for breakfast with Kendall and Edwards. Mitchell calendar. The topic of the conversation was political situation in Chile and the plight of El Mercurio and other anti-Allende forces, according to Mr. Helms. I recall that prior to this meeting, quote, with the president, the editor of El Mercurio had come to Washington, and I had been asked to go and talk to him at one of the hotels here. This having been arranged through Don Kendall, the head of the Pepsi Cola company. I have this impression that the president called this meeting where I have my handwritten notes because of Edwards' presence in Washington, and what he heard from Kendall about Edwards was saying about conditions in Chile and what was happening here. If you're not familiar with it, I would highly recommend you Google Pepsi Cola Company's involvement with Richard Nixon, with the CIA, and with heroin production, and most likely cocaine production. And that's probably what this meeting was about. So have fun with that. However, none of the CIA officers believed that assassination was within the guidelines Helms had been given. Senator Hart of Colorado did the kind of carte blanche mandate you carried, the marshal's baton that you carried out in a knapsack to stop Allende from assuming office, include physical elimination. Mr. Helms will not in my mind, because when I became director, I already made up my mind that we weren't going to have any of that business when I was director, and I have made that clear to my fellows, and I think they will tell you this. The following day, September 16th, Director Helms called a meeting at the CIA to discuss the Chilean situation. At this meeting, he related to his colleagues his understanding of the president's instructions. 2, the director told the group that President Nixon had decided that an Allende regime in Chile was unacceptable to the U.S. The president asked the agency to prevent Allende from coming to power or to unseat him. The president authorized $10 million for this purpose if needed. Further, the agency is to carry out this mission without coordination with the Departments of State or Defense. Memorandum, genesis of the project, 16th of September 1970. Kissinger's recollection of the September 15th meeting with President Nixon is in accordance with that of Richard Helms. Although Dr. Kissinger did not recall the president's instructions to be as precise as those related by Director Helms, he did testify that, quote, the primary thrust of the September 15th meeting was to urge Helms to do whatever he could to prevent Allende from being seated. Kissinger testimony, page 13. We have an asterisk here. The documents and the officials from whom the committee has heard testimony are in substantial agreement about what President Nixon authorized on September 15th, namely CIA involvement in promoting a military coup in Chile. There is not, however, agreement about what was communicated between the CIA and the White House, and hence what was authorized by the latter in the week between October 15th and the death of General Schneider, October the 22nd. This matter will be discussed in Part 5 of this report on the Schneider killing. It is clear that President Nixon wanted Helms to encourage the Chilean military to cooperate or to take the initiative in preventing Allende from taking office. Kissinger testimony, page 12. Operationally, the CIA set the president's instructions into motion on September 21st. On that day, 2 cables were sent from CIA headquarters to Santiago informing the CIA chief of station of his new directive. 3. Purpose of exercise is to prevent Allende assumption of power. Parliamentary legerdemain has been discarded. Military solution is objective. Headquarters to Station 236, 21st of September 1970. B. Track 2. This is authority granted to CIA only to work toward a military solution to problem. As part of authority, we were explicitly told that 40 committee, state ambassador, and embassy were not to be told of this track 2, nor involved in any matter. Headquarters to Station 240, 21st of September 1970. B. Background tracks 1 and 2. United States government concern over Allende regime in Chile did not begin with President Nixon's September 15th instructions to the CIA. For more than a year, Chile had been on the 40 committee's agenda. At an April 15, 1969 meeting of the 303 Committee, the predecessor of the 40 Committee, the question arose as to whether anything should be done with regard to the September 1970 presidential election in Chile. At that time, Director Helms pointed out that, quote, an election operation will not be effective unless an early enough start is made. We have an asterisk here. Covert U.S. government involvement in large-scale political action programs in Chile began with the 1964 presidential election. As in 1970, this was in response to the perceived threat of Salvatore Allende. Over $3 million was spent by the CIA in the 1964 effort. On March 25, 1970, the 40 Committee approved a joint embassy-CIA proposal recommending that spoiling operations, propaganda, and other activities be undertaken by the CIA in an effort to prevent an election victory by Allende's Popular Unity Coalition. A total of $135,000 was authorized by the 40 Committee for this anti-Allende activity. On June 18, 1970, the U.S. ambassador to Chile, Edward Corey, submitted a two-phase proposal to the Department of State and the CIA for review. The first phase involved an increase in support to the anti-Allende campaign. The second was a contingency plan to make a $500,000 effort in Congress to persuade certain shifts in voting on 24th October 1970. Phase 2 was, simply stated, a proposal to bribe Chilean congressmen to vote against Allende should he win a plurality in the September 4th election. On June 27, 1970, the 40 Committee increased funding for the anti-Allende spoiling operation to $390,000. A decision on Ambassador Corey's bribe proposal was deferred pending the results of the September 4th election. The 40 Committee met twice between the time Allende received a plurality of the popular vote on September 4th and President Nixon issued his instruction to Director Helms on September 15th. At both these meetings, the question of U.S. involvement in a military coup against Allende was raised. Kissinger stressed the importance of these meetings when he testified before the Select Committee. We have another asterisk. This and other references to the 40 Committee discussions and actions regarding Chile are contained in a memorandum provided to the committee by CIA entitled Policy Decisions Related to Our Covert Action Implementation in the September 1970 Chilean presidential election, dated October 9, 1970. On August 25, 75, we subpoenaed all White House National Security Council documents and records relating to the effort by the United States government to prevent Salvador Allende from assuming office. On September 4th, the committee received 46 documents from the White House relating to Chile, covering the period September 5th to October 14th, 1970. Here we have a double asterisk. Following the September 4th election, the CIA's Directorate of Intelligence circulated an intelligence community assessment of the impact of an Allende government on the U.S. national interests. That assessment dated September 7, 1970. Regarding threats to U.S. interests, we conclude that 1. The U.S. has no vital national interests within Chile. There would, however, be tangible economic losses. 2. The world military balance of power would not be significantly altered by an Allende government. 3. An Allende victory would, however, create considerable political and psychological costs. A hemispheric cohesion would be threatened by the challenge that an Allende government would pose to the OAS and by reactions that it would create in other countries. We do not see, however, any likely threat to the peace of the region. B, an Allende government would represent a definite psychological setback to the U.S. and a definite psychological advance for the Marxist idea. Intelligence Memorandum. Situation following the Chilean presidential election. CIA's Directorate of Intelligence, 7 September 1970. I think the next meeting of September 15th has to be seen in the context of the two previous meetings of the 40 Committee on September 8th and September 14th, in which the 40 Committee was asked to look at the pros and cons and the problems and prospects of a Chilean military coup and to be organized with the United States assistance. Kissinger testimony, page 5. According to the summary of the 40 Committee meeting on September 8th, the following was discussed, quote, all concerned realized that previous plans for a phase 2 would have to be drastically redrawn. The DCI made the point, however, that congressional action against Allende was not likely to succeed and that once Allende was in office, the Chilean opposition to him would disintegrate and collapse rapidly. While not advocating a specific course of action, the director further observed that a military golpe against Allende would have a very little chance of success unless undertaken soon. Both the chairman and the attorney general supported this view. At the close of the meeting, the chairman directed the embassy to prepare a cold-blooded assessment of 1. The pros and cons and problems and prospects involved should a Chilean military coup be organized now with U.S. assistance, and 2. The pros and cons and problems and prospects involved in organizing and effecting a future Chilean opposition to Allende. CIA memorandum policy decision related to our covert action implementation in the September 1970 Chilean presidential election, 9th of October 1970. Ambassador Corey responded to the 40 Committee's request for a cold-blooded assessment on September 12th. He stated that we, the embassy, believe it now clear that Chilean military will not move to prevent Allende's ascension, barring unlikely situation of national chaos and widespread violence. The ambassador went on to say that our own military people are unanimous in rejecting the possibility of meaningful military intervention in political situation. He concluded by stating, quote, "What we are saying is this cold-blooded assessment is that opportunities are for furthering significant U.S. government action with the Chilean military are non-existent." The CIA's response was in the same vein. Viron Vakey, Kissinger's assistant for Latin American affairs on the NSC staff, summarized the CIA's cold-blooded assessment in a memo to his boss, quote, "Military action is impossible. The military is incapable and unwilling to seize power. We have no capability to motivate or instigate a coup." Memorandum for Kissinger, Chile 40 Committee meeting Monday, September 14th. Viron Vakey. On September 14th, the 40 Committee met to discuss these reports and what action was to be taken. Quote, "Particular attention was devoted to a CIA-prepared review of political and military operation in the Chilean electoral situation based on the embassy and station's cold-blooded assessment. The committee focused on the so-called Rube Goldberg gambit, which would see Alessandri elected by the Congress on October 24th, resigning thereafter to leave Frey constitutionally free to run in a second election for the presidency. Ambassador Corey was asked to go directly to President Frey and see if he'd be willing to commit himself to this line of action. A contingency of $250,000 was approved for covert support of projects which Frey or his trusted team deem important. It was further agreed that a propaganda campaign be undertaken by the agency to focus on the damage of an Allende takeover. CIA memorandum policy decision related to our covert action implementation, September 9th, 1970. Following the September 14th 40 Committee meeting and the President Nixon's September 15th instruction to the CIA, U.S. government efforts to prevent Allende from assuming office proceeded on two tracks. Track 1 comprised all covert activities approved by the 40 Committee, including the $250,000 contingency fund to bribe Chilean congressmen, as well as propaganda and economic activities. These activities were designed to induce the opponents to Allende in Chile to prevent his assumption of power, either through political or military means. All right, we have an asterisk here. The terms Track 1 and 2 were known only to CIA and White House officials who were knowledgeable about the President's September 15th order to the CIA. The committee sent letters to various senior officials inquiring if they were, in fact, not knowledgeable of the Track 2 activities. Those letters were sent to Secretary of State William Rogers, Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird, Deputy Secretary of Defense David Packard, Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs Alexis Johnson. Oh my God, there's a list of like fucking 30 people here. I'm not going to read them all. All except Klein have indicated they had no knowledge of the Track 2 activity at the time. Klein indicated he heard of the activities in a general way from his subordinate who handled 40 committees work from the former associates at the CIA. In oral communications with committee staff members, Secretaries Roger and Laird have indicated they were unaware of Track 2. All right. Well, guys, I'm tired. I'm going to wrap it up here for today. We're on page 87 of 210. I appreciate your tuning in. If you haven't subscribed to my other show on Substack, bloodyhistory.substack.com, it's definitely worth it. We're having a good time over there. Come join us. Learn about the history you were never taught in school. Guys, appreciate you tuning in. I got some books to sell. Please head over to Amazon, pick one up. If you want a signed copy of a book, you can contact me, and those are available directly from me. So I appreciate you guys tuning in, and thanks again.